guys, it's Nikki. I'm here for the Book of the Month review for the book club. It's The Ballroom by Anna Hope. I really enjoyed this book. It was sad, it was haunting, it was heartwarming, it was wonderful. So the story itself follows 3 points of view at Sharston Asylum. You touch base with Ella, who's a recent arrival. You touch base with John, who's been there for a while, but his story really picks up after Ella arrives. And it also touches on Charles Fuller, who's one of the assistant medical officers who's live-in at the asylum. Overall, the story itself is just about the 3 people, the 2 patients and the medical officer, and their experiences at Sharston Asylum in 1911 specifically. The really interesting part of this for me is the interaction of all the characters at the ballroom. The ballroom is this weekly ball that's held in one of the common areas in the asylum, and the reason to me it was so interesting is it's the only time you very regularly get to see the male and female patients interacting. Otherwise, they are gender segregated, their jobs are gender segregated, and all of their daily lives, really. And this once a week ball is the only time you get to see them interact. So the interactions there are very interesting, and the anticipation of it also colors the kind of humdrum, weary activities that are done during the week. That's kind of all I really have to say about the summary. I will now move on to my likes and dislikes. I have quite a few likes in this list. I did really enjoy the book. I liked the multiple perspectives. I've touched on this a lot because I've done a lot of books with multiple perspectives because I love multiple perspectives. I love getting the nitty-gritty, deep and dirty thoughts from each character, and I love how it fleshes out the character and how seeing the interactions from the different perspectives really fleshes out the character that they're viewing, the character that's watching, and just the other characters that are involved. And it's very nice to get that multi-impact with the use of multi-perspectives for developing and fleshing out characters and moving the story forward. I really liked that the story has flawed characters. They are not perfect people, but they are real people, they're believable, and a lot of their stories are heart-wrenching, and you really feel a lot of sympathy for these characters. They change a lot from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, and your opinion grows and changes with them as their characters develop. I thought it was a really interesting insight into the early 1900s asylums in Britain. It was horrifying but interesting to see the mental illness treatment of people who were considered mentally ill and what exactly they considered mentally ill people to be and what was a mental illness to them. And then I'll go on to my 5th like for this book, and it's the ending. I loved the ending. It's all the things I said the book was at the beginning. It's tragic, it's heartwarming, it's haunting, it's beautiful, it catches you, and it ties everything up beautifully. There's really no loose ends. Everything gets explained, but it's not without loss and it's not without tragedy. Things aren't getting tied up without consequences, and I loved it. It did some good things for me, and it's really what got me to give the book as high a rating as I did. That being said, I'll now talk about my 2 dislikes. One of the big ones was that the pacing was odd. It was sometimes really slow and draggy, and other times it was really quick. And I do understand that it was used to emphasize how much people anticipated the ballroom event every week, and to show how short of a time period it actually was, but how much hope it gave them. But it was very odd, and it was very hard to get used to. And once I did get used to it, it was better. Before you really have Ella going to the ball, that pacing's still there. And so it's kind of odd having this dragging and then rushing without her actually going to the ballroom or anticipating the ballroom. And I think that's why I had such a hard time wrapping my head around the pacing at the beginning. And because of that, because the pacing was hard for me to get into, that's why I'm listing it as a dislike, even though it did serve a function in terms of driving the story. And my other negative is kind of the treatment or abuse that you would get with the care that these patients were receiving in the asylum. Honestly, it was horrifying. And I do understand that the standard of care was very, very different this early in our society. It's just the lack of compassion and the lack of true medical knowledge for a lot of these people was just, it was awful. And the things they were doing to these patients was horrifying. And a lot of it ends up coming actually down to Charles Fuller's character, like his interest in eugenics, this whole involuntary sterilization. You start off really well and you think he's going to be compassionate and kind, and then you realize, nope, he is a product of his time. And it contributes to this lack of care and just abuse of the patients, and it's horrifying, and I didn't like it, but I knew it was historically accurate, so it is very hard to move through for me. That being said, that's really all I have to say about my likes and dislikes for the book. I will now move on to the characters. All right, so I'm touching on 4 characters here. 3 of them are the perspectives that we read from, and one is Ella's friend Clemency, and I felt that she was pretty important to the story, so I will touch on her briefly as well. I'll start with Ella. She was very recently admitted. She's one of those low-class factory workers that you hear a lot about. As with all of the characters in this, she is flawed, and part of that flaw was just the loss of control that resulted in her being admitted to the mental health institution, even though it's the opposite of what she needed and she wasn't mentally ill. But, you know, forced incarceration. And although it doesn't really talk about it, I think they consider her one of those hysterical females as in terms of her diagnosis. I don't remember if there's anything actually officially talked about by Dr. Fuller in regards to this. She's considered an acute case and not someone who will require long-term care. Now I'll touch on Clemency. There is something seriously wrong with this girl, and they're not doing her any favors by the way they're treating her here. Part of what they think is her issue is her obsession with books and how books are contributing to her mental illness because she's reading them. But she's weirdly obsessive, and it's the obsession with books that concerns me, not the books themselves. She also has this kind of weird obsession with Fuller. She has a weird obsession with John's letters. And when she kind of tells you about herself, you realize that she had like very serious anorexia that was related to whatever mental health issue was going on. It was so hard reading from Ella's perspective about her, because she came off as sweet and kind and compassionate, but a switch could flip, and it was just really hard to see her going through an acute issue related to her mental illness and just not getting appropriate care. Next, I'll touch on another one of the perspectives you read from. It's John Mulligan. He's considered to be melancholia, which we consider depression now. And it's really sweet the way he starts to write the letters, and these letters that he writes are to Ella, and they just kind of reawaken him and help him move past and deal with some of the things he's gone through. And it's really cute that he just, like I said, reawakens kind of to reality, and through his perspective and kind of what you hear from both Ella and Dr. Fuller. John Mulligan is considered one of those chronic patients. He's never been admitted to like a never getting out of here ward, but he's been in the asylum itself for a while. And next I'll move on to Dr. Fuller. Charles Fuller is a medical officer. He is a med student through one of the Irish colleges. However, he's also a very talented musician, and honestly, that is his love. And I know that a lot of his issues are related to the fact that he had to become a med student. He has this weird complex with his father and societal expectations through his father, and you feel bad for him when you hear about this part. You feel kind of proud of him because he's the one who developed this music program at the asylum. He plays for the patients during the day. He's developed the Ballroom program. It's looking up for Charles Fuller. And then you get into some of the nitty-gritty dark secrets in his life. And although being a eugenics supporter is not a nitty-gritty dark secret for him, it is horrifying. I understand that eugenics was very common back in the early 1900s, but just, it's horrifying, especially given that he's applying it to people he considers mentally ill. He's putting so many people in danger. And you're also, towards the end, kind of seems to be this kind of suppressing his sexuality. There's a few scattered interactions that give me that kind of that impression, and that again makes sense. Given the time, it's just very bad for him to be considered homosexual or bisexual, kind of wherever he falls. But suppressing this, having the eugenics, and just dealing with all of these things ends up in him trying to subvert Ella and John's relationship, but it also results in him acting out very cruelly towards the patients, including John and Ella, specifically John. And it's just very weird side character, like just a very odd point of view to read. Sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes you wanted to punch the guy in the face. That's really what Dr. Fuller was. That's really all I have to say about the characters. There were a lot of other patients I could have touched on, but their roles were so minor that it didn't necessarily move the story forward. They just supplied very good context for the setting. So I will move on to the Book of the Month book club questions that I do every month with these books. First question, was the story plot-based or character-driven? As with my past few books, this is a character-driven story. The actions and the feelings of the characters are what is moving the story forward and developing and fleshing out the characters themselves and the characters they're associated with. Question 2. What is your initial reaction to the book? Well, first I was completely horrified. And then my initial reaction to the developing story and after you get through the first couple chapters, it's such an interesting mixture of sadness and hope. That feeling is what kept me reading. I read this book in one sitting. It kept the sadness and the hope that you got from the different perspectives just pulled me farther and farther into the story. Question 3, what was your favorite chapter or scene? Honestly, my favorite scene was the very first letter that Ella gets from John. There's just this hope and like, oh, this man wrote to me. Like, what does he want to say? And it's such a friendly letter. There is no romance involved, but she just feels such shame that she can't read it. And Clemency has proven herself to be such a good friend that she gets Clemency to read it, and that's how Clemency gets involved. It's such a turning point for a lot of characters. It's this introduction of a new obsession for Clemency. It's this increase of hope for Ella. It's this increase of hope and decrease of passiveness with John. And it's just, for me, that's kind of really when the story started moving along more swiftly, which I enjoyed. Was the setting unique? Could it have taken place anywhere? The setting was very unique, being this early 1900 mental asylum. I guess the only way it could have taken place somewhere else is if it was in a mental asylum in another country that had similar values. So not really. The setting was very unique and it suited the story very well. Next we move on to question 5. How did the characters change throughout the story? All of the characters changed throughout the story. Some increased your attachment to them and others made you want to punch them in the face. So Ella and John progressed in such a way that my attachment and compassion for them increased. They break out of their shells, so to speak, and just in terms of these ideas of hope and friendship that are expressed in these letters, and just this promise of romance and this budding romance that develops out of it. It's very sweet, it's very slow burning, and it develops in such a way that you can tell it's not insta-love or insta-attraction. And I really, really liked that. The other character who changed very dramatically throughout the book was Charles Fuller. starts off pretty promising and kind, and then as you go through, you realize he really is a product of the generation he's a part of, and he starts spiraling a little bit, his true colors start showing, and he ends up suppressing and overcompensating to hide secrets, and it results in cruelty towards his patients, and he just acts out very negatively because of how he reacts to other situations. And what the fuck? Why eugenics? Why eugenics is such a terrible choice. Terrible choice. The only character that I guess really didn't change was Clemency. Based on what Clemency tells you about her history pre-asylum, she kind of just sticks to, she doesn't really develop, she doesn't become as dynamic, and she ends up spiraling and just getting into a feedback loop where she just continues to spiral negatively and it results in going back to the serious situation that resulted in her being admitted. How do you feel about the ending? What are your likes, dislikes? Would you change anything? In my likes and dislikes list, I already talked about the ending and how much I loved it. And I'm actually, I really don't want to give you guys spoilers for this because the ending was so amazing to me. But not everybody may necessarily think that. Because it was such a cute romance, it tied itself up very oddly for that. It wasn't this beautiful, consequence-free wrap-up, but I felt it wrapped up well, and it was still such a heartwarming ending, and it was so well written that you just, based on how you felt about the characters, you really appreciated the ending that was given. So I loved it, didn't dislike anything, wouldn't change it. The ending made the book for me. Question number 7. What was the pacing like? Again, talked about this a bit in my likes and dislikes. Wasn't crazy about the pacing. Sometimes it was really slow, sometimes it was really fast. There was a specific structure to it that was good for moving the book forward and kind of giving you the idea of what the atmosphere was like and how much anticipation there was for the ballroom. It was really hard for me to get into. Wasn't crazy about it. And then my final book club question this month, question 8. Would you read another book by this author, or would you read this book again? I'm going to say yes to both of these questions. Ballroom was very well written, absolutely loved it, and I would pick up another book by this author in a heartbeat just based on how well I felt this book was written. I would definitely give any other books by this author a try. That really sums everything up here. Now to go to the final summary. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. Like I keep saying, it was heartwarming, it was tragic, it was haunting. It had a unique setting, the characters were relatable, they were believable, and they were all well written. You liked the ones you were supposed to like, you were wary of the ones you were supposed to be wary of, and you wanted to punch one in the face, and I'm very sure you were supposed to want to punch him in the face. So all of that being said, I would give this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Like I said, the big reason I'm not giving it a 5 out of 5 is just because I had such trouble getting into the pacing, and that really threw off my initial enjoyment of the book. Although the ending was absolutely phenomenal, and anybody who likes happy, sad endings should read this book. There's no loose ends and everything is concluded, and that's what I really like. So that being said, guys, Ballroom and a Hope, 4.5 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend that you read this. And I will see you guys in the first week of April with my new book review. Bye!